My name is Rachel Moore, and 3 weeks ago I was escorted out of Orion Metrics by security as if I were a criminal. Today, I'm sitting across the conference table from my former colleagues, representing their newest competitor. They don't just look uncomfortable, they look terrified. And they should be. I don't just know every weakness in their product. I designed them. Growing up in Milwaukee, I never imagined I'd be at the center of what financial magazines are now calling the fintech coup of the decade. My story didn't start in a Silicon Valley garage or with venture capital millions. It began in a cramped studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and a perpetually dripping faucet that the landlord refused to fix. The night I wrote the first line of code for what would eventually become TrendSight, the financial analysis tool that would change everything, I was heating up leftover spaghetti in a microwave that sparked dangerously every time I used it. My laptop had a cracked hinge held together with duct tape, and I was using the free Wi-Fi from the coffee shop downstairs because I couldn't afford my own internet that month. I'd been laid off from my data analyst position at Midwest Financial 3 months earlier. They called it restructuring, but we all knew it was because the new CTO wanted to bring in his own team. With my savings dwindling and student loans looming, I was applying to jobs during the day and working on my own project at night. The idea for TrendSight came to me during my time at Midwest Financial. I noticed patterns in market fluctuations that seemed to precede major shifts, but the analysis tools we had were too slow to capitalize on these insights in real time. So I built something better, a predictive algorithm that could analyze thousands of data points simultaneously and flag potential issues before they became catastrophes. I didn't know it then, but that algorithm would eventually help First National Bank avoid a $387 million loss during a liquidity crisis. At the time, though, I was just trying to create something impressive enough to land me a new job. When my former colleague Thomas called to tell me about a position at Start Forward, a fintech incubator downtown, I jumped at the chance. I showed them TrendSight during my interview, expecting modest interest. Instead, they offered me a position on the spot and wanted to develop my tool as their flagship product. For the first time in months, I could pay my rent without checking my bank balance 3 times first. I upgraded from 1-ply toilet paper to 2-ply. I bought a new laptop, small victories, but they felt monumental. The team at Start Forward was small but brilliant. Marcus Weinberg, a back-end developer who could write elegant code faster than anyone I'd ever met. Beth Nowak, an accountant with an uncanny ability to translate complex financial concepts into accessible language. And Raj Patel, a UX designer who transformed our data-heavy interface into something intuitive and almost beautiful. We worked 18-hour days, fueled by takeout and the genuine belief that we were building something revolutionary. When we secured our first client, a regional credit union looking to upgrade their risk assessment tools, we celebrated with champagne in plastic cups on the office rooftop. Within 8 months, we had a dozen clients and were starting to attract attention from larger firms. The turning point came when First National implemented our system just before a market downturn triggered a liquidity crisis across the banking sector. While other institutions scrambled, First National had been warned days in advance by TrendSight's predictive alerts. They adjusted their positions accordingly and avoided catastrophic losses. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to us. We were featured in financial technology publications. Investment offers began pouring in. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. That's when Orion Metrics entered the picture. Orion was everything we weren't. Established, polished, with offices in glass towers and marketing materials printed on heavy cardstock. They had a client list that read like a who's who of Wall Street, and resources that made our startup look like a school project by comparison. When their representatives first approached us about a potential acquisition, I was skeptical. We'd built something special, and I worried about losing control of my creation. But the numbers they presented were difficult to ignore, and they promised operational autonomy within their corporate structure. "We don't want to change what you've built," said James Harrington, their silver-haired CEO, during our first meeting. "We want to scale it." The initial offer was substantial, but I pushed for something more important than money: protection. My lawyer, Elena Ward, a a sharp-minded woman who specialized in tech acquisitions and charged fees that made me wince, insisted on a clause that would become crucial later. Clause 11b stated that if I was removed from my position without cause, I would have the right to reclaim ownership of the original core product for the symbolic price of $1. They'll never agree to this, I told Elena after she drafted it. They will if they want your algorithm badly enough, she replied, her confidence unwavering. And if they don't, then you know exactly how much they really value your contribution. To my surprise, Orion accepted the clause with minimal pushback. The acquisition moved forward, and suddenly I had a new title: Director of Financial Intelligence, and an office with a view of Lake Michigan. The first 6 months at Orion were everything they promised. Our team was given resources to expand Trendsight's capabilities, and I was included in strategic planning at the executive level. The product was implemented across Orion's impressive client portfolio, generating results that exceeded even my optimistic projections. I should have known it wouldn't last. The shift began subtly. New executives joined the company, and the culture started to change. Carson Blake, the new CFO, spoke a corporate language that seemed designed to obscure rather than communicate. He used phrases like synergy window and forecast elasticity in meetings, nodding sagely as though he'd imparted great wisdom. Diana Rain was brought in as VP of Brand Strategy, a position I hadn't realized we needed. She was immaculately dressed, with perfect hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. During our first one-on-one meeting, she explained that numbers make clients feel anxious and suggested we rename our dashboard the Confidence Board. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Gradually, I noticed I was being excluded from important meetings. Product strategy sessions were suddenly scheduled during times I was known to be unavailable. When I did attend, the conversations had shifted from technical capabilities to marketing angles and user empathy journeys. The engineering team meetings, once focused on solving complex problems and improving our algorithms, were increasingly dominated by presentations featuring pastel-colored slides and stock photos of diverse people pointing at imaginary charts. One by one, members of my original team began to leave. Marcus was the first, accepting a position at a competitor after being repeatedly sidelined in development discussions. Beth followed soon after, citing cultural differences in her exit interview. Raj held out the longest but eventually departed for a startup that promised creative freedom. The R&D budget for Trendsight was gradually reduced, with funds redirected to a marketing campaign featuring a cartoon penguin named Penny, who offered financial wisdom in a series of animated shorts. Meanwhile, core features of the product were being simplified or removed entirely in the name of accessibility. In company presentations, I was increasingly referred to as the founding spirit behind Trendsight, a term that essentially meant obsolete but kept around for nostalgia. My technical input was dismissed as too focused on the back end or not aligned with our current user-centric approach. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in the parking garage. I was heading to my car when Marcus, who had maintained contact despite his departure, approached me between the concrete pillars. "They're going to remove you from the core analytics team," he said in a low voice, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "I heard it from Jacob in HR. They're restructuring next week, and you're not in the new org chart." That night, I pulled out my acquisition contract and reread Clause 11b. The language was clear. In the event of termination without cause, Party A retains the right to reclaim ownership of the originally developed tool within 30 days. I texted Elena, "We need to prepare. They're making their move soon." Her response was immediate. "Documentation ready. Let me know when." 3 days later, I was summoned to the quarterly strategy meeting. As I entered the boardroom, I immediately sensed something was different. Carson and Diana sat together at the head of the table, with James Harrington notably absent. "We're excited to announce a strategic realignment," Carson began, not bothering with preliminaries. "In order to better serve our evolving client base, we're streamlining our product development process." What followed was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. The realignment involved transferring all product authority to Diana's team. TrendSite, now rebranded as Financial Pulse, would be redesigned with a more intuitive interface featuring sentiment indicators instead of hard data. They showed mock-ups of my carefully constructed dashboard, now rendered in peach tones with icons representing financial breathing. Complex risk assessments had been replaced with simplified wellness meters. When asked for my input, I said only, "Good luck with that." 3 days later, HR called me into a sterile conference room. The security officer waiting by the door told me everything I needed to know. The termination paperwork was already prepared, citing strategic differences and failure to adapt to evolving company vision as the official reasons. I was escorted to my desk, watched as I collected my personal items, and then walked to the exit like a criminal. My access badge was deactivated before I reached my car. That evening, I opened my safe, removed a single dollar bill, and wrote a check for that amount. I attached it to a letter containing a single sentence. I hereby exercise my rights under Clause 11B of our agreement, reclaiming ownership of the core product. Elena delivered the legal notice to Orion's offices Monday morning. The response was immediate panic. They hadn't expected this. They'd assumed the clause was unenforceable or had expired during corporate restructuring. What they failed to realize was that the legal merger of our entities had never been fully completed. The original Delaware-registered company still existed as a separate legal entity, and I was still its controlling shareholder. While I didn't make a public announcement, I did send private messages to 3 key clients. The original tool is coming back. If you're interested in continuing with the authentic version, we're open to discussion. The fallout was swift. Orion lost 2 major contracts within 48 hours. Staff began submitting resignations. Diana published a lengthy LinkedIn post about innovation culture transcending founder pain that had comments disabled after 20 minutes due to the overwhelming negative response. I leased office space 2 floors below Orion's headquarters, a deliberate choice that I knew would irritate them, and named the new company True Axis Data. Marcus was my first hire, followed quickly by Beth. Even Raj returned, bringing with him 2 junior designers who had joined Orion after our acquisition and were disillusioned by the company's direction. Within a month, we had signed agreements with 5 former Orion clients. The financial press began covering the story, dubbing me the $1 strategist. In our office, I framed the original contract and hung it near the coffee machine, a daily reminder of the importance of reading the fine print. 6 weeks after my departure from Orion, I was invited to give a keynote address at the annual Financial Technology Innovation Summit. Standing before an audience of 700 industry professionals, I recounted my journey, emphasizing the importance of maintaining a product's integrity even as it scales. When I described Clause 11B, there was an audible reaction from the crowd, a mixture of gasps and appreciative laughter. I concluded by holding up the framed dollar bill that had secured my freedom. "Never underestimate the woman who wrote the original agreement," I told them, as the audience rose in a standing ovation. That was 4 months ago. Today, True Axis Data employs 27 people, including 16 former Orion employees. Our client list continues to grow, and we've just secured Series A funding to expand our offerings beyond financial analytics. As for Orion, they've pivoted away from predictive analytics entirely, focusing instead on financial wellness solutions, whatever that means. Their stock price has dropped 17% since our split, and industry rumors suggest they're seeking a buyer. Carson Blake was quietly let go last month. Diana Rain is still posting inspirational corporate content on LinkedIn, though her most recent update mentioned an exciting new chapter that sounds suspiciously like a job search. And me? I'm exactly where I belong, at the helm of the company I created, surrounded by people who value substance over style, building tools that actually work rather than just looking pretty in demonstrations. The most valuable lesson I've learned through all of this isn't about algorithms or financial markets or even corporate politics. It's about knowing your worth and protecting what you create. It's about understanding that sometimes the most important line in a contract isn't the purchase price. It's the exit clause. Every morning, I pass by that framed dollar bill on my way to my desk. It reminds me that sometimes the smallest investments yield the greatest returns. And that's a financial principle even Penny the Penguin could understand. The boardroom of Blackstone Capital fell silent as I finished my presentation. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline stretched toward Lake Michigan, the afternoon sun glinting off glass towers. This was the third major investment firm I'd pitched this week, and potentially the most important. "So let me get this straight," said Victoria Blackstone, leaning forward in her chair. "You built a financial analysis tool so powerful it predicted a market collapse 3 days before it happened, then lost it in a corporate takeover, only to win it back for a single dollar?" I smiled. "That's the condensed version, yes." Victoria exchanged glances with her partners. At 62, she was a legend in investment circles, known for backing unconventional founders and maintaining a portfolio that consistently outperformed market expectations. And Orion Metrics, they just let this happen. They underestimated both me and the legal framework of our agreement, I replied. A common mistake when acquiring founder-led companies. Clearly, Victoria said with a slight smile. What I find most interesting isn't the legal maneuvering, though that's impressive. It's that your clients followed you despite Orion's substantial resources. That speaks volumes about your product's value. Marcus, now my CTO, pulled up our client retention metrics on the presentation screen. 87% of our original clients returned within 90 days of our relaunch. The remaining 13% were locked into multi-year contracts with Orion that included prohibitive exit penalties. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. And your growth projections. I gestured to Beth, our newly appointed CFO, who advanced to the financial slides. Conservative estimates put us at 140% growth over the next 18 months, with an estimated valuation of $240 million by Q3 next year. The meeting continued for another hour, diving deep into technical specifications, market positioning, and expansion strategies. When we finished, Victoria personally walked us to the elevator. "My team will be in touch within 48 hours, she said, shaking my hand. But off the record, I haven't seen a pitch this compelling in years. As the elevator doors closed, Marcus, Beth, and I exchanged cautious glances. "That went well," Marcus said, loosening his tie. "Better than Morgan Stanley yesterday." "Don't celebrate yet," I cautioned. "We need this round of funding to scale properly, especially if we're going to expand into the European market next year." Beth checked her phone. "Speaking of which, the London team just sent over the regulatory compliance documents for review. We need to address those by tomorrow if we want to stay on schedule." The elevator reached the lobby, and we crossed the marble floor toward the revolving doors. Outside, the October wind whipped between buildings, carrying the first hint of winter. "I need to stop by the office before heading to the airport," I said, checking the time. "The development team is presenting the beta version of the new risk assessment module, and I promised I'd give feedback before catching my flight." "I'll join you," Marcus said. "There are a few technical issues I want to discuss with the team." Beth shook her head. "I'll have to skip it. I have a call with potential investors in Singapore in 30 minutes. But I'll see you both in New York tomorrow for the FinTech Forum." We parted ways on the sidewalk, Beth heading east toward our hotel while Marcus and I caught a taxi back to our temporary Chicago office. "You know," Marcus said as we navigated through midday traffic, "a year ago you were fighting to keep control of your own algorithm. Now we're talking about international expansion and 9-figure valuations." I watched the city pass by through the window. It still doesn't feel real sometimes. Which part, the success or the betrayal? Both, I admitted. I never imagined Orion would try to push me out, and I certainly never planned to build a competing company. I just wanted to create something useful. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Do you ever regret it? The acquisition, I mean." It was a question I'd asked myself many times. "No," I said finally. Without Orion, we wouldn't have had the resources to develop Trendsight beyond its initial capabilities. And without the takeover attempt, we wouldn't have built True Axis. Phoenix from the ashes, Marcus mused. Something like that. When we arrived at our office, a temporary space we'd leased while establishing our Chicago presence, the development team was already gathered in the conference room. 6 engineers, all recently hired from top tech companies, were engaged in an animated discussion around a whiteboard covered in flowcharts and code snippets. Aliyah Rahman, our lead developer and a former Google engineer, spotted us first. Just in time, she said, waving us over. We've hit a roadblock with the probabilistic risk modeling component. For the next 2 hours, we immersed ourselves in the technical challenges of building what we hoped would be the next generation of financial analytics tools. This was the part of my job I loved most, solving complex problems that had real-world applications, working with brilliant minds to create something that hadn't existed before. By the time we finished, I had just 45 minutes to reach O'Hare for my flight to New York. As I gathered my belongings, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from James Harrington, the former CEO of Orion who had overseen our acquisition. Interesting timing, I murmured, opening the message. Rachel, I hope this finds you well. I've been following True Axis's progress with interest and, frankly, admiration. What you've accomplished in such a short time is remarkable. I've recently left Orion to pursue other opportunities and would appreciate the chance to meet in person next time you're in Chicago. There's much I'd like to discuss about the industry's future, and perhaps about ways our paths might align again. Regards, James. I stared at the screen, unsure how to feel. James had always been cordial during my time at Orion, but he'd also been conspicuously absent during the events leading to my termination. Had he known what was coming? Had he approved it? Everything okay? Marcus asked, noticing my expression. I showed him the email. What do you think? Trap or olive branch? Marcus read it twice. Hard to say. Harrington was always the most reasonable of the Orion executives. And if he's really left? It's worth considering, I agreed, putting my phone away. But not today. Today we focus on New York. The taxi ride to O'Hare gave me time to reflect on how dramatically my life had changed. 1 year earlier, I'd been an employee at a company that viewed me as dispensable. Now I was the CEO of a rapidly growing startup that was attracting attention from major investors. The irony wasn't lost on me. Orion's attempt to sideline me had instead catapulted me into a position of greater influence and potential than I might ever have achieved within their corporate structure. As I navigated through security and found my gate, I received another notification, this time from Elena. Just got word. Orion's board meeting didn't go well. Stock down another 5% in after-hours trading. Sources say 3 directors have resigned. Thought you'd want to know. I didn't take pleasure in Orion's struggles. Too many good people still worked there. People who had nothing to do with the decisions that led to our split. But I couldn't deny feeling a certain validation. The market was confirming what I had known all along. Their approach was fundamentally flawed. Boarding began, and I found my seat in first class, another change from my startup days of economy middle seats and red-eye flights. As the plane taxied toward the runway, I opened my laptop to review my presentation for tomorrow's forum. The FinTech Innovation Forum was one of the industry's premier events, bringing together entrepreneurs, investors, and established financial institutions to discuss emerging trends and technologies. I'd been invited to participate in a panel discussion on disruption from within, how startups are transforming traditional finance. The irony of discussing disruption when my own career had been so dramatically disrupted wasn't lost on me. But that was the nature of this industry: constant change, adaptation, and occasional reinvention. As the plane lifted off, I closed my laptop and looked out the window at Chicago receding below. Somewhere down there was the building where I'd been escorted out by security just months ago. Now I was returning as a competitor, a founder, a CEO. The flight to New York was smooth, giving me time to catch up on industry news and prepare for tomorrow's panel. When we landed at LaGuardia, I checked my messages to find one from Beth. Call with Singapore went well. They're interested but have concerns about our encryption protocols for cross-border data transfers. Can we discuss before the panel tomorrow? I texted back confirming a breakfast meeting, then caught a taxi to the hotel. The forum had arranged accommodations at a luxury property in Midtown, another indicator of how far we'd come. 6 months ago, we were working out of a hastily leased office with folding tables as desks. After checking in, I ordered room service and spread my notes across the king-sized bed, refining my talking points for the panel. The forum organizers had sent questions in advance, most focusing on innovation and disruption in financial technology. But I suspected the moderator would be interested in the dramatic story of TrueAccess's creation. How much should I share? The industry already knew the broad strokes, the acquisition, the removal, the dollar clause. But the details of Orion's internal politics remained private. I'd been careful in interviews to focus on the product rather than the personalities involved. Still, there was value in the narrative. Our story resonated with other founders who feared losing control of their creations. It positioned TrueAccess as the authentic alternative to corporate sanitized financial tools. And, if I was being honest, it made for compelling marketing. I was still considering this when my phone rang, an unknown Chicago number. Rachel Moore, I answered. Ms. Moore, this is Amanda Chen from Bloomberg Financial News. My guard immediately went up. Journalists had been persistent in seeking interviews since our story broke. How did you get this number, Ms. Chen? One of our reporters was at your Blackstone presentation today. We understand you're close to securing Series A funding at a valuation exceeding $200 million years. I kept my voice neutral. We don't comment on ongoing investment discussions. What about reports that Orion Metrics is considering legal action to challenge your ownership of the core technology? This was news to me, but I wasn't about to let her know that. Any such action would be without merit. Our legal position is unambiguous. And your response to Diana Rain's statement that TrueAccess is using proprietary extensions developed at Orion. So that was their angle. Ms. Chen, I'm happy to schedule a proper interview through our communications team, but I don't conduct business through unexpected phone calls. If you have specific questions, please email them, and we'll respond appropriately. I ended the call and immediately texted Elena. Heads up, Bloomberg fishing about Orion legal action and Diana making claims about proprietary tech. Anything I should know? Her response came quickly. First, I'm hearing of it, likely just noise, but I'll make some calls. Stick to no comment for now. I added another note to my growing to-do list. Develop a more comprehensive media strategy. As we grew, so would the scrutiny. The next morning began early with a 7 a.m. breakfast meeting with Beth and our legal counsel, Michael Dawson, who had flown in overnight after I forwarded Elena's concerns. I've reviewed all the possible angles, Michael said as we ate in a private dining room. There's no viable claim against our ownership of the core technology. Clause 11B is ironclad. What about extensions developed during my time at Orion? I asked. The agreement specifies originally developed tool, which courts have typically interpreted broadly in favor of the creator. Michael explained. But even if they could claim ownership of specific features added during your Orion tenure, the fundamental architecture and algorithms are indisputably yours. Beth tapped her tablet. From a financial perspective, we should prepare for potential legal expenses. I'll adjust the projections to include a contingency fund. Do we need to disclose this to potential investors? I asked. Yes, but framed correctly. Michael advised. Position it as a desperate move by a struggling competitor rather than a legitimate threat. After breakfast, we headed to the forum venue, a recently renovated convention center near Times Square. The place was buzzing with activity, attendees moving between sessions while exhibitors showcased their latest innovations. Our panel wasn't until 11 a.m., giving me time to network and attend other sessions. I was listening to a discussion on blockchain applications in international finance when I spotted Diana Rain entering the hall. She saw me at the same moment, her practiced smile faltering briefly before recovering. After a moment's hesitation, she changed direction and approached. Rachel, she said, extending her hand. I thought you might be here. I shook her hand firmly. Diana, Enjoying the forum? Very much. Though I must say, your name seems to be on everyone's lips this year. Good ideas tend to get attention, I replied evenly. Her smile tightened. Indeed. Though I was surprised to hear you claiming full credit for innovations developed by the entire Orion team. So that was why she'd sought me out, to establish a narrative in person. I've always acknowledged the contributions of my team, many of whom now work at True Axis. What I don't acknowledge is corporate interference that undermined the product's integrity. Diana glanced around, lowering her voice. You know, this doesn't have to be adversarial. There could still be ways for us to collaborate. I raised an eyebrow. Collaborate? After Orion pushed me out and is now apparently considering legal action? She looked genuinely surprised. Legal action? That's not... Where did you hear that? Bloomberg seems to think it's newsworthy. Diana shook her head. Carson may be making noise, but the board hasn't approved any litigation strategy that I'm aware of. Interesting. Either she was out of the loop, or the Bloomberg reporter had been fishing with false information. In any case, Diana continued. My point is that the market is large enough for multiple approaches. Orion is focusing more on the user experience and accessibility aspects, while True Axis clearly emphasizes technical capability. The market seems to prefer capability over cartoon penguins. I observed. Diana's composure slipped for just a moment. The Penny campaign tested extremely well with focus groups. Focus groups don't make multi-million-dollar financial decisions. A chime sounded, indicating the next session was about to begin. Diana straightened her jacket. I should go. I'm moderating a panel on user interface innovation. Of course, wouldn't want to keep you from explaining how peach-colored dashboards revolutionize finance. She gave me a long look. You know, Rachel, not everything is about algorithms and data points. People need tools they can understand and trust. True, but those tools also need to work. Diana walked away without responding, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. Beth appeared at my side. Was that wise? Probably not, I admitted, but satisfying. Well, enjoy the satisfaction quickly. Our panel starts in 20 minutes, and the moderator wants to speak with all participants beforehand. The panel discussion took place in the main hall, with several hundred attendees filling the seats. Beside me on stage were the founders of 3 other fintech companies and the moderator, a well-known venture capitalist who specialized in financial technology investments. Today we're discussing disruption in financial technology. The moderator began after introductions. And I can't think of a more dramatic example than what Rachel Moore has experienced. Rachel, can you share how True Axis emerged from your experience at Orion Metrics? I gave a condensed version of events, emphasizing the technical vision rather than the corporate politics. Ultimately, it came down to a fundamental disagreement about what financial analytics should do. We believed, and still believe, that sophisticated, accurate analysis delivers more value than simplified visualizations. And yet, the moderator pressed, isn't there an argument that truly disruptive technology should be accessible to non-experts? Absolutely. I agreed. But accessibility doesn't mean oversimplification. Our clients are financial professionals who need depth and precision. They don't need cartoon characters explaining concepts they already understand. They need tools that give them an edge in a competitive market. The discussion continued, touching on technological trends, regulatory challenges, and market opportunities. Throughout, I was conscious of striking the right balance, confident without arrogance, critical of Orion's approach without appearing vindictive. When the panel concluded, I was approached by numerous attendees, some congratulating me on True Axis's success, others expressing interest in potential partnerships or investments. Business cards accumulated in my pocket as I navigated through conversations, trying to allocate my limited time effectively. As the day progressed, I participated in a roundtable discussion on algorithmic transparency and gave a brief interview to a respected industry publication. By late afternoon, I was mentally exhausted but encouraged by the connections made and opportunities identified. I was gathering my things to leave when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, who had remained in Chicago. Heads up, Carson Blake just resigned from Orion. Press release cites personal reasons, but industry sources say board forced him out. Before I could process this information, another message arrived, this time from an unknown number. Congratulations on your panel today. Would still appreciate that conversation when you're back in Chicago. James Harrington. The landscape was shifting again. With Carson gone and James reaching out, the dynamics between Truaxis and Orion were entering a new phase. What that meant for our future remained to be seen. As I left the convention center and stepped into the New York evening, I felt a familiar mix of excitement and apprehension. The same feeling I'd had in that studio apartment when I wrote the first line of code for what would become TrendSite. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The dollar I'd spent to reclaim my creation had already yielded returns beyond anything I could have imagined. And this was just the beginning. The next 6 months passed in a blur of activity. The Series A funding from Blackstone Capital and 2 other investors provided the resources we needed to accelerate product development and expand our team. We moved into permanent offices in Chicago and opened satellite locations in New York and San Francisco. Our client base grew steadily, particularly among mid-sized financial institutions that appreciated our technical capabilities but had previously lacked access to enterprise-grade analytics tools. The European expansion progressed ahead of schedule, with regulatory approvals secured in the UK, Germany, and France. On a personal level, the pace was relentless. I traveled constantly, dividing my time between client meetings, investor relations, and team building. Sleep became a luxury, and my apartment in Chicago felt more like a storage unit for clothes than an actual home. The media attention continued, with profiles in major business publications and speaking invitations from prestigious conferences. I became known not just for the Truaxis product, but for the story behind it. The dollar clause became something of a legend in startup circles, taught in business schools as a case study in founder protection. Through it all, I maintained a careful distance from Orion Metrics. I monitored their activities through industry channels but avoided direct engagement. After Carson's departure, they underwent a significant restructuring, with Diana Rain eventually following him out the door. James Harrington, despite his messages, never received a response from me. I wasn't ready for that conversation, not while we were still establishing our independent identity. Then came the day everything changed again. It was a Tuesday morning in April, 6 months after the New York Forum. I was in our Chicago headquarters, reviewing the quarterly performance metrics with Beth and the executive team. Client retention is at 94%, Beth reported, highlighting a section of her presentation. Average contract value has increased by 22% since last quarter, primarily due to upselling additional modules to existing clients. What about the churn in the financial advisory segment? I asked, noting a small but concerning trend in the data. We've identified 2 main factors, Beth explained. First, some smaller firms are being acquired by larger institutions that already have analytics partners. Second, she was interrupted by my assistant, Olivia, who entered the conference room with an unusually serious expression. Sorry to interrupt, Olivia said, but there's something you all need to see. She used the room's tablet to project a news article onto the main screen. The headline sent a jolt through the room. Breaking. Global financial systems hit by coordinated cyber attack. Major banks reporting data breaches. This is happening right now, Olivia explained. The attack appears to be targeting risk assessment and trading systems across multiple institutions. Marcus was already on his phone, fingers flying across the screen. I'm checking our security protocols. So far, our systems appear unaffected, but I'm implementing additional safeguards. Which institutions are confirmed targets? I asked, scanning the article. First National Wellington Trust, and at least 4 others. Olivia reported, all of them using either Orion systems or their direct competitors. I felt a chill run through me. First National had been one of our earliest clients, both at Start Forward and now at Truaxis. Their chief risk officer, Daniel Morrison, had personally championed our technology against considerable internal resistance. We need to contact all our clients immediately, I said, standing up. Marcus, establish a crisis response team. I want our security specialists monitoring all client systems. Beth, prepare contingency plans for emergency support services. We may need to deploy teams on site at affected institutions. The room erupted into controlled chaos as everyone moved to execute their assigned tasks. I stepped aside to call Daniel at First National, but his line went straight to voicemail. Daniel, it's Rachel Moore. We're aware of the situation and mobilizing support. Please call me as soon as you can to coordinate our response. Over the next 3 hours, the scale of the attack became clear. 27 financial institutions across 3 continents had been targeted simultaneously. The attackers had exploited a previously unknown vulnerability in a widely used protocol that connected various financial analysis systems. Our operations center transformed into a war room, with engineers working frantically to analyze the attack vector and strengthen our clients' defenses. Screens displayed real-time security metrics from institutions around the world, many flashing red warning indicators. Most of our clients are holding steady, Marcus reported, pointing to a cluster of green indicators. The vulnerability appears to primarily affect systems using the older FPS protocol. We switched to the enhanced RFPS standard last year. What about First National? I asked. They were in the middle of a transition between protocols when we last spoke. Marcus checked his tablet. Their main systems are on our protocol and secure, but they have satellite offices still running the vulnerable system. We're getting reports of limited breaches in those locations. My phone rang. Daniel Morrison's number at last. I stepped away from the chaos to take the call. Rachel, it's a nightmare here, Daniel said without preamble, his voice strained. We've got regulators, board members, and the media all demanding answers we don't have yet. What's your exposure looking like? I asked. Main trading platforms are secure. Thank God we followed your recommendation on the protocol upgrade. But we've got data integrity issues in our European subsidiaries, and some of our risk models are showing anomalous results. We can't tell if it's actual market movement or compromised inputs. We can help with that, I said. I'm sending a team to your Chicago office right now. They'll bring a secure instance of our advanced pattern recognition module. It can distinguish between actual market anomalies and artificial data corruption. I owe you one, Rachel, Daniel said, the relief evident in his voice. Just doing our job, I replied. But Daniel, I need to know. Have you heard anything about Orion's clients? Are they experiencing similar issues? There was a pause. Worse, from what I'm hearing, their systems were more deeply integrated with the vulnerable protocol. Some of their clients are completely locked out of their risk assessment tools, trading floors operating blind. After finishing the call, I rejoined the team in the operations center. The situation was stabilizing for our clients, but the broader financial ecosystem remained in turmoil. Reports were coming in of significant market disruptions as institutions struggled to assess their exposure and trading positions. Late that evening, as we continued to monitor the situation, I received an unexpected visitor. James Harrington was escorted into our operations center by security, looking haggard and significantly older than when I'd last seen him 6 months earlier. Rachel, he said, approaching cautiously. I apologize for the intrusion, but this couldn't wait. I led him to a quiet corner of the room. What are you doing here, James? I've been consulting with Orion since my departure, he explained. When the attack hit, they called me in. It's bad, Rachel, really bad. Their entire financial pulse platform is compromised. I maintained a neutral expression. I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not sure how this involves True Access. James ran a hand through his silver hair. The vulnerability exists in code that was developed during your time at Orion. They're claiming it was intentionally created, a backdoor left by either you or your team. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. That's absurd, and you know it. I do know it, James agreed quickly, which is why I'm here unofficially. The Orion board is panicking. They're looking for someone to blame, and you're the convenient target. They're going to publicly accuse me of creating a backdoor in financial software? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. That's not just defamatory, it's potentially criminal. Which is why I'm warning you, James said. You need to get ahead of this. Rachel, their legal team is preparing a statement as we speak. I studied him carefully. Why are you really here, James? You disappeared when Orion was pushing me out. Now you show up with warnings about legal threats. What's your angle? James looked genuinely pained. I deserve that. The truth is, I was outvoted on your removal. Carson and the board chair orchestrated it while I was dealing with a family medical crisis. By the time I returned, it was done. Convenient timing. But true nevertheless, he insisted. I resigned when I realized what had happened. But by then you'd already reclaimed the core product and started True Axis. I've been watching from the sidelines, impressed by what you've built and ashamed of my failure to protect you at Orion. I wanted to believe him, but trust came hard after everything that had happened. So, what are you suggesting? A joint statement, James said. You and I together, addressing the vulnerability, clarifying that it was an industry-wide issue unrelated to any individual or company, and offering to cooperate on solutions. Why would I associate myself with Orion's problems? Because the alternative is a public legal battle that will damage everyone involved, including your clients. The markets are already in turmoil. A high-profile dispute between financial technology providers will only increase uncertainty. He had a point. While I was confident in our legal position, a protracted public fight would distract from our core mission at a time when our clients needed us most. I'll consider it, I said finally, but I need to consult with my team first. James nodded. That's all I ask. Here's my direct number. Call me when you decide. After he left, I gathered Marcus, Beth, and Elena in my office to discuss the situation. It's a trap, Elena said immediately. They're trying to shift blame for their security failures. Associating with them now risks contaminating our brand with their incompetence. I agree it's risky, Beth said. But there's also a financial reality to consider. An extended legal dispute would be costly, and the market uncertainty could impact our next funding round. Marcus had been quiet, examining the technical details of the vulnerability on his tablet. Here's what doesn't make sense, he said finally. This vulnerability isn't in code we wrote. It's in the FPS protocol that Orion continued to use after our departure. We abandoned that approach specifically because of security concerns I raised during the transition. I remembered those discussions. Marcus had identified potential issues with the protocol months before our departure from Orion. But his warnings had been dismissed by the new technical leadership as unnecessarily cautious. So we have documentation showing we identified the risk and recommended against using that protocol? I asked. Marcus nodded. I filed a formal technical recommendation. It should be in Orion's records, though I doubt they're eager to acknowledge it now. That changes things, Elena said. If they try to blame you publicly, we can demonstrate not only that you didn't create the vulnerability, but that you explicitly warned against the approach they ultimately took. Which brings us back to James's proposal. I said, do we engage or keep our distance? The discussion continued late into the night. By morning, we had developed a strategy that balanced caution with pragmatism. I called James and agreed to a joint media appearance, not to share blame, but to demonstrate industry cooperation in the face of a common threat. The press conference took place at a neutral location, a downtown hotel conference room filled with financial and technology journalists. James and I sat at a table flanked by technical experts from both companies. The cybersecurity incident affecting financial institutions worldwide is not attributable to any single company or individual. James began, reading from our carefully negotiated statement. It stems from a vulnerability in an industry-standard protocol used by multiple service providers. When my turn came, I emphasized our commitment to client security. True Axis and Orion Metrics, while competitors in the marketplace, share a commitment to protecting the financial ecosystem, We are today announcing a joint technical working group to address the vulnerability and assist affected institutions in restoring full operations. The questions from journalists were predictably pointed, particularly regarding the timing of the attack relative to my departure from Orion. I stuck to the technical facts, highlighting Marcus's early identification of potential issues with the protocol and our subsequent decision to develop an alternative approach. The documentation shows that True Axis, then part of Orion, identified potential security concerns with this protocol more than a year ago. I explained. Our technical recommendation at that time was to transition to more secure alternatives, which is the approach we implemented at True Axis. By the end of the press conference, the narrative had shifted from potential corporate sabotage to a textbook case of cybersecurity best practices. One company had heeded early warnings about a vulnerability, while others had not. As the event concluded, James approached me privately. That went better than I expected, he admitted, though I suspect some at Orion won't be pleased with how the facts emerged. The facts are the facts, I replied. I'm just glad we could redirect the conversation toward actually solving the problem. Indeed. James hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, Rachel, I've always admired your technical vision. What happened at Orion was a mistake, one I allowed through inaction. I hope someday we might find a way to collaborate again under better circumstances. I studied him thoughtfully. Maybe someday, James, but for now, I think we're both where we need to be. The aftermath of the cybersecurity incident accelerated changes already underway in the financial technology landscape. Institutions that had prioritized superficial user experience over robust security found themselves facing regulatory scrutiny and client defections. True Axis, with its proven security model and rapid response during the crisis, gained additional credibility and market share. 3 weeks after the attack, Victoria Blackstone invited me to dinner at her private club overlooking Lake Michigan. That was quite a baptism by fire, she said as we settled at a window table with a spectacular view of the illuminated shoreline. Most CEOs don't face industry-wide crises and attempted corporate sabotage accusations in their first year. I smiled. I prefer to think of it as an accelerated professional development opportunity. Victoria laughed, a rich, genuine sound that contrasted with her formidable reputation. That's one way to look at it. Another is that you've just demonstrated exactly why we invested in True Axis. How so? Crisis reveals character, she said simply. When the financial system was under attack, your first instinct was to protect your clients, not your company's reputation. You deployed resources to help affected institutions, including those that weren't even your customers. And when offered the chance to engage in a damaging public fight with Orion, you chose collaboration instead. It was the practical decision, I pointed out. It was the right decision, Victoria countered, and not one that every founder would have made. Trust me, I've backed enough entrepreneurs to recognize the difference between those who build for the long term and those who optimize for short-term advantage. The waiter arrived with wine, and Victoria raised her glass. To the next phase of True Axis, may it be slightly less dramatic than the first. I clinked my glass against hers. I'll drink to that. As dinner progressed, Victoria shared insights from her decades in the investment world, while I outlined my vision for True Axis's future. By the time dessert arrived, she had made an unexpected proposal. The Blackstone Innovation Fund typically takes a passive role with our portfolio companies, she said. But in your case, I'd like to offer more direct involvement. Specifically, I'd like to join your board. I nearly choked on my coffee. Victoria Blackstone was notoriously selective about her board commitments, typically reserving them for established companies with valuations in the billions. That's unexpected, I managed. Victoria smiled. You've built something special. Rachel. Not just a valuable company, but an approach to financial technology that prioritizes substance over style. I believe True Axis has the potential to reshape how financial institutions approach data analysis and risk management. I'd like to help make that happen. I'm honored, I said sincerely. But I should warn you, Our board meetings tend to involve more technical discussions than most investors are comfortable with. Perfect, Victoria replied. I've sat through enough PowerPoint presentations about market disruption and paradigm shifts to last several lifetimes. I'd much rather hear about actual innovation. 2 days later, we announced Victoria's appointment to our board. The financial press took immediate notice, with headlines highlighting the unusual vote of confidence from one of the industry's most respected investors. Our stock price, still modestly traded on smaller exchanges, jumped 23% in a single day. Meanwhile, Orion Metrics continued its decline. Their quarterly earnings report showed client attrition accelerating and revenue falling below analyst expectations for the third consecutive period. Rumors circulated about potential bankruptcy or acquisition, with several private equity firms reportedly conducting due diligence. One evening in late May, as I was preparing to leave the office after another 14-hour day, Marcus knocked on my door. "Got a minute?" he asked, an uncharacteristic nervousness in his demeanor. "Always for you," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "What's up?" Marcus sat down but remained tense, fidgeting with his tablet. "I've been approached by Orion. They want me to come back as CTO." I felt a momentary flash of panic but kept my expression neutral. Marcus had been with me from the beginning. Losing him would be a significant blow, both professionally and personally. "That's unexpected," I said, echoing my response to Victoria's board offer. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's absurd," Marcus said, relaxing slightly. "After everything that happened, no way. But I wanted you to hear it from me directly, not through industry gossip." Relief washed over me. "I appreciate that. Did they approach anyone else from our team?" "Not that I know of, but it makes sense they'd start with me. Their technical leadership has been a revolving door since we left, and they're desperate to stabilize their platform." I nodded thoughtfully. "It's interesting timing. I've been hearing rumors about potential buyers circling Orion. New leadership might be trying to shore up key positions before a sale." "That would explain the generous compensation package," Marcus admitted. "Significantly above market, even for a CTO role." "They couldn't pay you enough," I said with a smile. Marcus laughed. "Exactly what I told them, though in more professional terms." After he left, I remained at my desk, contemplating this new development. Orion's attempt to recruit Marcus suggested a level of desperation I hadn't fully appreciated. Their technical challenges must be even more severe than reported if they were willing to approach someone so closely associated with their competitor. The following week brought confirmation of my suspicions. Bloomberg reported that Orion Metrics was in advanced talks with Global Financial Technologies, a conglomerate known for acquiring distressed tech companies at bargain prices. "Interesting," Beth commented when I showed her the article during our morning meeting. GFT typically strips acquired companies for parts, valuable patents, client relationships, key personnel. They rarely maintain brands or standalone products. "So Orion as we knew it would effectively cease to exist," I mused. "Most likely. The question is what happens to their client base. GFT doesn't have a competing analytics product, so they'd presumably transition those relationships to another provider." The implications were significant. Orion, despite its decline, still maintained relationships with several major financial institutions. If those clients were suddenly in play, it could represent a substantial growth opportunity for Truaxis. "Let's prepare an outreach strategy," I decided. "Nothing aggressive, we don't want to appear predatory. But we should be ready to respond if Orion clients start looking for alternatives." Beth nodded. "I'll work with the sales team on a tailored approach. Many of these institutions were interested in our technology originally, but stayed with Orion due to existing contracts or relationships." The acquisition was announced the following Monday. Global Financial Technologies would purchase Orion Metrics for $78 million, a fraction of its valuation during our acquisition 2 years earlier. The press release included the standard corporate platitudes about synergies and strategic alignment, but industry analysts correctly identified it as a distress sale. What no one anticipated, however, was what happened next. 3 days after the acquisition announcement, I received an email from James Harrington with a subject line that simply read, "Urgent, please call." Intrigued, I called the number provided. "Rachel, thank you for getting back to me," James said, sounding harried. "I need to meet with you as soon as possible. It concerns the Orion acquisition and something you should be aware of." "I can meet tomorrow morning," I offered, curiosity overcoming my usual caution. "Not at your office," James said quickly. "Somewhere private. There are complications I'd rather discuss in person." We arranged to meet at a small cafe in Lincoln Park, away from the financial district where we might be recognized. I arrived early the next day, selecting a table in the back corner with a clear view of the entrance. James arrived precisely on time, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater rather than his usual tailored suits. He ordered coffee and waited until the server had departed before speaking. "The Orion sale isn't what it appears," he began without preamble. "GFT doesn't want the company or its products. They want the client relationships and, more specifically, access to their financial data." I frowned. "That's not unusual in acquisitions." "No, but this is. GFT is a shell. The actual buyer is Meridian Capital Partners." The name was familiar, a hedge fund known for aggressive trading strategies and occasional regulatory issues. "Why would a hedge fund want Orion's analytics platform?" "They don't," James said. "They want the data flowing through it. Orion's privacy policies and client agreements have loopholes that could potentially allow the platform operator to aggregate and analyze client data for system improvement purposes. Meridian plans to exploit those loopholes to gain trading insights across multiple financial institutions." The implications were disturbing. "That's ethically questionable at best, potentially illegal at worst." "Exactly," James agreed. "Most clients don't realize their analytical tools could be used to extract insights about their trading strategies or positions. If Meridian executes this plan, it could undermine confidence in the entire financial technology sector, including True Access." I studied him carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" James sighed. "Multiple reasons. First, it's simply wrong. A violation of client trust that could damage the industry we both care about. Second, as the technical creator of what became Orion's platform, you might be drawn into any subsequent investigations or litigation, even though you've long since departed. And third," he hesitated. "And third," I prompted. "I want to make amends for my failure to protect you at Orion," he admitted. "I should have been more vigilant, more involved. Perhaps if I had been, none of this would have happened." His sincerity seemed genuine, but I remained cautious. "What exactly are you suggesting we do with this information?" "I believe the clients have a right to know before the acquisition closes," James said. "But if I come forward alone, it will be dismissed as the grievance of a former executive. If you join me, with your technical credibility and current market position, people will listen." It was a tempting proposition but fraught with risk. Inserting ourselves into a corporate acquisition based on insider information could expose us to legal challenges, regardless of our intentions. "I need to consult with my team," I said finally. "This isn't just about me or even True Access. It potentially affects the entire financial technology ecosystem." James nodded. "I understand. But please, move quickly. The acquisition closes in 10 days. I returned to the office and immediately gathered our executive team and legal counsel. After explaining the situation, the reactions were mixed. "It's not our fight," Elena cautioned. "Intervening in another company's acquisition based on secondhand information carries significant legal risk. But if what James is saying is true, it could damage client trust in all financial technology providers." Marcus argued, "Including us." Beth approached it from a market perspective. "There's also the client opportunity to consider. If Orion's customers learn their data might be exploited, they'll look for alternatives immediately." I listened to all perspectives, weighing the risks against our responsibilities. "What if we approach this indirectly?" I suggested finally. "Rather than making accusations about Meridian's intentions, we could publish an industry white paper on data privacy best practices in financial analytics. A technical document highlighting the types of vulnerabilities that exist in older platforms. Marcus added, catching my direction. Not naming Orion specifically, but providing clients with questions they should ask their providers. And simultaneously updating our own privacy policies and client agreements to explicitly prohibit the practices we're concerned about. Elena contributed, establishing ourselves as the security-focused alternative without directly attacking competitors. The strategy took shape. We would raise awareness about the potential for data misuse without directly accusing anyone. Clients would draw their own conclusions and make informed decisions. Over the next week, our team worked around the clock to develop the white paper, update our policies, and prepare communications for both existing clients and the broader market. The document, titled Financial Analytics and Data Privacy, Ensuring Client Protection in the Age of Big Data, outlined specific vulnerabilities in common platform architectures and recommended questions institutions should ask their technology providers. We released it 3 days before the Orion acquisition was scheduled to close, accompanied by an announcement of TrueAccess's enhanced privacy protections and data usage limitations. The reaction was immediate. Financial technology publications picked up the story, with analysts noting the timing relative to the Orion acquisition. Several major institutions publicly stated they were reviewing their analytics providers' data policies. 2 days later, Bloomberg reported that the acquisition terms were being renegotiated due to newly identified compliance considerations. James called that evening, "Well played," he said. "You've accomplished what needed to be done without exposing yourself to unnecessary risk." "We did what was right for the industry," I replied. "What happens with Orion now is up to them and their clients." Indeed. Though I suspect global financial technologies and their backers are less enthusiastic about the purchase now that their data strategy has been exposed. He was right. The following week, the acquisition was officially postponed for additional due diligence. Industry sources reported that several key Orion clients had already begun exploring alternative providers, with TrueAccess prominently mentioned as a leading candidate. In the midst of this industry upheaval, I received a surprising invitation, a request to speak at the Wharton School of Business about entrepreneurship and corporate ethics. The dollar clause story had apparently become a case study in their MBA program. "They want you to address their executive education program," Olivia explained as she handed me the invitation. 300 senior executives from across the financial sector. "That's intimidating," I admitted. "It's an opportunity," Beth countered. "These are decision makers at potential client organizations. Plus, the academic setting allows you to position TrueAccess's philosophy as a broader industry approach rather than just a competitive stance." She was right. Of course. I accepted the invitation and spent several weeks refining my presentation, determined to move beyond the personal narrative to the larger principles at stake. When the day arrived, I found myself standing before a packed auditorium of financial executives, many from institutions that had dismissed my approach during my time at Orion. The irony wasn't lost on me as I began my talk. The story of the dollar clause has become something of a legend, I acknowledged. But focusing on that single contract provision misses the larger point. The real lesson isn't about clever legal maneuvering, it's about alignment between creator and creation, between innovative technology and the principles that guide its development. I proceeded to outline what I called the integrity approach to financial technology, the belief that technical excellence, client interests, and ethical considerations could be aligned rather than treated as competing priorities. When we stripped away the unnecessary complexity, the cartoon mascots, and the marketing buzzwords, I explained. What remained was a tool that worked exceptionally well at its core purpose. That clarity of function, that technical integrity, translated directly to business success. The audience response was overwhelmingly positive, with the Q&A session extending well beyond the scheduled time. Afterward, I was approached by executives from several major institutions interested in exploring potential relationships with TrueAccess. Among them was Daniel Morrison from First National, who had become one of our strongest advocates following the cybersecurity incident. That was quite a speech, he said, shaking my hand warmly. Though you were more diplomatic about Orion than I expected. I smiled. No need to dwell on the past. Besides, from what I hear, Orion as we knew it won't exist much longer. Daniel nodded. The acquisition is officially dead. GFT walked away yesterday after 3 key clients, including us, notified Orion we wouldn't be renewing our contracts regardless of the new ownership. I hadn't heard that yet, I admitted. What happens to Orion now? Bankruptcy protection, most likely, Daniel replied. Though there are rumors about a potential management buyout led by some former executives, speaking of which, he gestured toward the back of the room, where James Harrington stood conversing with a group of attendees. Our eyes met briefly, and he nodded in acknowledgement. He's been making the rounds, Daniel continued, talking about returning to first principles and recapturing the original vision. Sound familiar? It did indeed. The phrases echoed my own language when describing Truaxis's mission. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, James approached me in the lobby. Impressive presentation, he said. You've clearly found your voice as an industry leader. Thank you, I replied. I hear you've been busy as well. Something about a management buyout? James smiled ruefully. News travels fast. Yes. I'm assembling a group to acquire what remains of Orion, not to compete with Truaxis, but to serve a different segment of the market. There's room for multiple approaches, as you've often said. Using my own words against me, I observed with a smile. Clever. Not against you, James corrected. Alongside you. In fact, that's what I wanted to discuss. We're exploring a potential partnership structure that would align our efforts while maintaining separate brands and focuses. I raised an eyebrow. You want to partner with Truaxis? In a limited but meaningful way. James confirmed. Your technical approach combined with our established relationships in certain sectors could be powerful. We wouldn't compete directly. You would continue to serve sophisticated financial institutions requiring deep analytical capabilities, while we would focus on smaller organizations needing simpler tools with strong support services. It was an intriguing proposition, not a merger or acquisition, but a strategic alignment that could expand our reach without diluting our core identity. I'm not saying no, I said carefully, but any such arrangement would need very clear boundaries and expectations. Of course, James agreed. I wouldn't expect anything less from the woman who gave us Clause 11B. We parted with an agreement to continue the conversation once his acquisition was further along. As I headed to the airport for my flight back to Chicago, I reflected on the unexpected turns my professional journey had taken. 2 years earlier, I had been heating leftover spaghetti in a sparking microwave, writing code on a broken laptop, just hoping to create something valuable enough to land me a job. Now I was leading a company valued at over $300 million, speaking to rooms full of executives and contemplating strategic partnerships with former competitors. The dollar I had spent to reclaim my creation had yielded returns beyond anything I could have imagined. But the true value wasn't measured in market capitalization or client contracts. It was in the opportunity to build something authentic, something that reflected my values and vision without compromise. As the plane lifted off, I opened my laptop to review our latest product development roadmap. There was still so much to build, so many problems to solve. The financial world was constantly evolving, presenting new challenges and opportunities for those willing to approach them with integrity and innovation. The journey hadn't been easy, and I knew there would be more obstacles ahead. But for the first time since that night in my studio apartment, I felt completely aligned with my path, creator and creation moving forward together on our own terms. And that, I realized, was worth far more than $1.